Hello, I am Chandu Nair, handling the course on marketing management. Today we will talk about a very important subject, the subject of price, and the topic today is developing pricing strategy and programs. So by the end of this chapter, what we'll try and understand are the following. A, the objectives of a pricing policy, the cost factors that play a role in pricing, demand factors in pricing, various pricing approaches and methods, and to some extent the customer psychology related to pricing, how to respond to price changes and different price quality strategies. Now, very interesting thing about pricing. All other elements of the marketing mix so far that we've talked about have generally revolved around spending money. They all are cost centers. Now this decision of price, this is the only P that really relates to generating revenue for the company, and therefore this becomes a very important element of the marketing mix and a very important decision overall. So how to decide the pricing objective for a company and for a particular product line or for a product is very critical. In addition, how to determine the demand becomes very important, because there is a relationship between price and demand, both from general economics point of view and specifically from the marketing point of view. How to also estimate costs becomes very vital for a marketing manager. What costs to include, exclude, why should one do so, and how to analyze what competition is doing, what is their cost structure, how are they meeting the competitive situation, and then the selecting of the final price. Now these are the various steps that one goes through. So let's get on with it. Now the first and foremost and the very critical thing for any marketer is to figure out what is the pricing objective, what exactly is happening to the company, what exactly is happening to the product line, what exactly is happening to that specific brand or product. So the first set of objectives, for example, could include things like, am I in it just to survive? If there is a bunch of companies out there, for example, if you take the Indian telecom market and specifically the cell phone market, there are at the top the major players, either nationally or even regionally. But there are these newer entrants who are still struggling to find a place. So would you say that somebody like Uninor is in a survival mode at this point in time while it's a global player in India? Isn't in that kind of a mode? It's a big question to ask, and therefore what should its pricing be? So is that a question of survival, or is it to maximize how much of profits you can make? It also depends, like we saw earlier, on things like which stage of the product life cycle the product could be, where exactly does one have competitive strengths, what is one's product positioning, so on and so forth. But is the objective to maximize current profits, or is the objective to maximize your share of market? So you can make out that these are pretty different kinds of objectives, and each has a very direct impact on the price that one chooses to have for a product. Now, also there is the issue of penetrating the market. Many times you know that at this particular price, people will not buy or choose a particular product or service. For example, if you take cell phones again, in the initial phase when cell phone services were launched, it used to cost 16 rupees per minute. Today, in many places, it is in terms of 30 paise or 50 paise per minute, and that too it's not for the full minute. The pulse rate is also changed. So actually the value to the customer is significantly better. And what has happened, the cell phone market, which was just very restricted to a few people, has exploded and is crossing 500-600 million in terms of population in India alone. So that's a fairly huge penetration, and this could not have happened without some aggressive pricing. Now when does market penetration really work? When the market is very price sensitive. There are several products where people are very sensitive to the pricing of that particular product category, and many of those product categories really have seen growth only when the price has dropped. Cell phone instruments and cell phones are already a case that I have talked about. Or the production and distribution costs also fall because of various kinds of experience that the company has, and because even across the supply chain costs of materials etc. has happened. Electronics in general has seen such dramatic drops in pricing. Laptops which cost so many thousands of rupees today are available for the fraction of the original price. And then the third reason is competitive, that a low price which you bring out actually discourages, it acts as an entry barrier and discourages current and potential competition. So there are several reasons for us to look at a market penetration pricing too, and this gives you a pretty good idea of the kind of objectives that you could set for yourself and the range of products or the products that you have in mind. Now the next important step is to figure out, the price demand equation, at which kind of price would there be more or less demand. So one aspect one has to consider is how sensitive is that particular product, to price as an element, and also what is the total cost of ownership. Sometimes in many cases it's not just the product or service that you are offering that alone is the cost, but it also the cost of owning other elements. Example, if you buy a laptop, it's not just the price of the laptop that's important, it's the price of the software that you require to have, it may be the cost of electricity, maybe it may be other things that impinge on the total cost of owning a particular product. So what exactly is the total cost one needs to figure out, because a customer will calculate it that way. So let's take a look at issues where there's a lower sensitivity to price. There are several places where there is not so much sensitivity to price. For example, a product is very distinctive. In the case again of laptops or desktops, those who prefer an Apple Mac product, for example, like it irrespective of the fact that it's priced higher than other cheaper maybe Windows based laptops or desktops. That's because people feel that this is much more distinctive. Secondly, in some cases people may not be really aware of substitutes. For example, somebody is just using say Lipitor, in the US for cholesterol reduction, as a statin. Now they may not be aware of the generic substitutes, okay, and that might be a big reason why they're less sensitive to an increase or decrease in price of Lipitor. The third thing is, especially where it's a little complex product, example in the case of pharmaceuticals, buyers are not equipped to actually determine which substitutes are better and why. Okay, now it can happen that there are even natural substitutes for reduction of cholesterol, but many buyers of pharma products may not know how to compare which product is actually, which category may be better and why. Fourth reason could be that the expenditure for that particular category, say for example salt, in the overall expenditure on food and total groceries or provisions of a household, salt may occupy a very, very low percentage. So it's not worth the time and energy spent in figuring out, really for alternatives or substitutes. Then the other reason could be that the cost is borne by somebody else. Take the case of a car. It's the driver who drives it. The driver really may not care too much about the price of petrol because it's paid for by the owner of the vehicle that he is driving. So he's really not too bothered about the price in that case. The other thing is, sometimes the product is used with the assets that is already there with him. For example, if I am already having an idli grinder and I paid substantial amount for it, then the cost of the rice and the dal that I use to mix to create the the idli flour, the batter, is relatively insignificant because I have already invested heavily in the asset. Similarly, if in certain product cases, especially high signal products, like say luxury watches or something like that, or clothes, the design or the brand name has certain prestige and price becomes relatively irrelevant because of the prestige that the product or brand bestows on the user. And finally, in some cases people cannot store the product. Example, an airline seat is just there for that time and day, and if I have to go from point A to point B, I have no choice but to take that particular airline seat.